Superman Red Son is the latest DC animated film to hit VOD, and while lately the DC animated universe has been a little hit or miss, Red Son delivers a solid adaptation of one of the most beloved Superman stories of all time. What exactly makes this DC animated film a win, though? We're about to find out as we dive into the essential DC animated movies you should watch after Red Son. Hey, how's it going, everyone? And welcome to FilmSpeak, where film is our second language. I'm Griffin, as always, and if this is your first time checking out one of our videos, consider hitting that subscribe button for more insightful and articulate film discourse and analysis. Yes, if you are a channel regular, you'll know that this is not my usual setup. No, this is not my usual setup at all. Usually I got a really nice background behind here, and the video quality is a hell of a lot better than what you're seeing right now. But I find myself under quarantine and I'm staying with my girlfriend at the moment, so I had to improvise and I have a little bit of a mobile setup going on here. But of course, I still gotta put out content, and so I wanted to bring you guys another installment of my Film Essentials series. If you are new to this channel and you've never seen an episode of Film Essentials series, you can check out the first episode I did over there with Lee Winnell, where he talked about the essential films to watch after The Invisible Man, and we're gonna kind of do the same thing here, only because we're under quarantine, I opened it up to journalists and other film lovers and experts that could help me compile lists of essential movies for the topics at hand. This whole series is about giving you all the essential films to watch if you want to better understand and appreciate the topic at hand. Now, that topic at hand can be directors, actors, a specific film like this episode is going to tackle, or just a topic or genre altogether. Today's episode is going to, of course, center around Superman Red Son, the latest DC animated film, and I wanted to bring on a comics expert, someone who really knows the medium well, and someone who I am good friends with and haven't done a video with in some time. So I brought on my good friend Owen from Owen Likes Comics, who just put out an incredible video on the Clone Saga. Seriously, go check it out if you haven't already. And we dive deep into what makes a great DC animated adaptation. And with that, we came up with 3 essential films to watch if you want to better understand and appreciate Superman Red Son. Before we get started, let us know your picks for the essential DC animated films down in the comments section below. There are so many to choose from, and I know a lot of people resonate with different ones, so I'm really curious to see what you all have to say about that down in the comment section below. So without further ado, here are our essential DC animated films. Let's talk about Superman Red Son a little bit, first of all, because I have actually not watched the animated film yet, but I am familiar with the graphic novel. So for everyone watching, if you can give a little bit of background information on Superman Red Son and how they sort of adapted the graphic novel in animated form.
Yeah, so Superman Red Son is, like you said, it's the most recent DC animated film as part of the animated movie universe. Now, like you mentioned, they kind of have 2 different ways that they make animated movies. There are the very straightforward adaptations of different comics and graphic novels, and then they've also kind of got this shared cinematic universe of animated films as well. So Red Son's more of the former. It is an adaptation of the Mark Millar comic from the mid-2000s, where the premise is basically, what if Superman in 1939 didn't land in the United States in Smallville? What if he landed in, I think it's Ukraine? And what if he is raised in the USSR during the Cold War? Very simple premise, and it plays out over the span of like 80 years. It goes from the late 1930s all the way up to present day at the time that it's made, and you see how the Cold War and the wider DC universe changes as a result. It's a really interesting concept, and it's a comic that a lot of people really love.
It's actually a comic that I'd like to see adapted like in live action, just as sort of like a one-off.
It's funny.
Yeah,
that's it. Especially with DC kind of focusing more on self-contained, creator-driven films. Something like Red Son is now more likely than ever to happen. I've kind of fell out of love with a lot of the DC animated films over the last couple of years. Killing Joke was the straw that breaks the camel's back for me. So it was nice to check Red Son out and kind of be pleasantly surprised by it. Jason Isaacs voices Soviet Superman, and he is incredible. If you're not familiar with the plot and the twists and turns of Red Son, I won't spoil it. For the most part, it's fairly pretty straightforward, faithful to the graphic novel, simplifies a few things here and there, obviously, to make it into like an hour long, hour 30 movie. And it does kind of lose some of the wider ideological ideas from the Cold War that the comic really hammers home. A lot of the ideas of, socialism and capitalism kind of aren't as prominent, though they're still there, obviously, but they're not the focal narrative story. But yeah, overall, Red Son is a really, really strong entry into the DC animated movie universe.
So going off of that, then, I asked you to choose films that you feel are essential viewings for like DC animated films. And so what was sort of the criteria that you gave yourself when choosing the films that you've selected, especially as it pertains to Red Son?
Yeah, so when I tried to whittle down my choices to three movies that I think if you were either eager to watch Red Son or you'd watch Red Son and you wanted more DC animation, what the best ones would be. And so when possible, I tried to limit it to other adaptations of graphic novels. So two of the three I've mentioned are very straightforward adaptations of different beloved comic books. And the two are probably the most close to the source material adaptations. And then there's one that is an original concept, but it's my favorite DC animated film, so I had to sneak it in there. I think the variety of them is what makes them all important and essential, like you said. Because they're all based on very unique and different comic books. And each film, for the two of the three that are adaptations, they really capture the essence and the style of what makes that comic that it's based on so popular, which is something that Red Son does brilliantly.
With that, let's get into this essentials list. What is the first film in your list of three that you want to talk about?
So we'll start with the most close to home, which is the 2011 animated version of All-Star Superman. It's directed by Sam Liu, who is the same director that worked on Red Son, and it's based on the comic book of the same name, written by Grant Morrison and drawn by Frank Quitely. It came out between 2005 and 2008, and it's widely regarded as one of the best comic books of the century and one of the greatest Superman stories of all time. Both the comic and the movie essentially are based about the idea of Superman finding out he only has a year left to live, and the story takes place over this period of time and sees Clark both grapple with his own mortality and coming to terms with the fact that he's dying, and also him trying to figure out how he wants to leave his legacy on the world and leave the world itself. The comic was done in its own imprint, so it's not set in the regular continuity, which basically meant that Morrison could do basically nothing was off limits when he made All-Star. He didn't have to leave the story in a way that another writer could tell another story afterwards. It's very much written as if it's the final Superman story. Everything you've seen and watched and read came before happens, and then this is like the ultimate epilogue, which is something that the comic and this movie both do really well. I know origin stories are quite a popular thing, but you very rarely see a lot of stories focus on the early days of a superhero.
Yeah.
Like the Bull, like 90% of either the adaptations or the books themselves are set within like that character's like heyday. Yeah. So it's rare you see like the very young, unless it's a flashback or a specific origin, and you very rarely see after the heyday. When Grant Morrison wrote the original comic book, the idea of telling a Superman story that couldn't be told any other way or any other place than the way he did it was like really important to him. He didn't want to tell this story in a way that could be put in the regular continuity or in terms of the animated films, couldn't be part of the shared DC animated universe, because you can't tell a story after All-Star Superman. It's such a finite ending to this character that's been around since the 30s. It's not an emotional story in the sense that like there are specific things in it that are tearjerker. There's no one scene in it which makes you, bawl your eyes out. But it's the premise and it's the situation that Superman and his world finds itself in. You've never really seen a story where Superman has to say goodbye to Lois Lane. Even in the Death of Superman, that's so out of nowhere that Doomsday shows up. You never really... Superman, even, in the ways they've adapted that in the Death of Superman animated movies or in Batman v Superman, it's something that comes out of nowhere. Superman only dies because his instinctual reaction is to fight it, and then he essentially sacrifices himself. Where in this, it's not a physical being that kills him. It's, wider circumstances. He's essentially dying of mortal reasons. And so it's not like he's being punched to death or shot to death. He's dying slowly, and he's dying like an everyday person. and it's really uncharted territories for that character, and it's the way that the film and its way that the story demonstrates the effects that that has both on Clark as the inner person within Superman and also everyone else in that DC universe. It's brilliant.
Okay, but moving on to your next film, what do you got there?
Okay, so my second one is another very close adaptation of a popular, beloved DC comic book, and that is the two-part animated film of The Dark Knight Returns. Now, this came out in 2012 and 2013, and as you're probably aware, it's based on the 1986 graphic novel by Frank Miller, which is, I think it's fair to say, one of the most popular and one of the most well-known comic books ever.
Yeah, I mean, we always hear people talking about like Zack Snyder taking, inspiration from that film for like BVS, for Ben Affleck's Batman, and like even in The Dark Knight Rises to an extent, where it's like
The Dark Knight Rises is strange, like surprisingly lifted from a lot of that is taken from Dark Knight Returns, and even it's like when Tim Burton made the 1989 film. The Dark Knight Returns hadn't long come out. That was only 3 years earlier. But Burton, although he wasn't particularly into comic books, he did say that that was one of the things that drew him to Batman so much.
Well, it's just like The Killing Joke, just like Watchmen, just like the big iconic graphic novels. It's just one of those bodies of work that kind of crosses over into the mainstream, much like Superman Red Son, because of how just like distinct and iconic it is and how different it is from the other stories we get.
Yeah. So Dark Knight Returns, I'll just run through the basic premise of both the comic and the movie. It's handy because out of all the adaptations that DC have made for animation, Dark Knight Returns is the one where they literally didn't change a thing. It's probably the closest adaptation I've ever seen of any sort of comic book. It's set in the near future with a Batman who's kind of in his 60s, he's retired, and it's 80s infused, so it's kind of like a post-Cold War future. And it's basically about Batman coming out of retirement and saving the world one last time. He fights the Joker. Him and the Joker have one final battle. He faces off against Superman in, something that everyone is familiar with now after BVS. And the animated movie is brilliant. Obviously, Frank Miller's art style from the original comic is not for everyone. I think that's fair to say. But the animated movie, because what I like about some of these animated movies is instead of kind of having a uniform look of all of them, they try when possible to emulate the original style of the comics that they're adapting, which is something that Dark Knight Returns does. I wouldn't say it's like a perfect translation of Frank Miller's art, but there's definitely a lot of inspiration and trying to make it look like that, but also in a more clean and presentable way, I think it's fair to say. I mean, all the selling point for Dark Knight Returns has to be is that it's essentially like a neo-dystopian Batman story where Peter Weller voices Batman.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say.
That's all you need. That's all you need to say.
He's voiced by RoboCop.
I wanted to remind you to stay out of my way. In all the years to come, in your most private moments, I want you to remember the one man who beat you.
I know that when it comes to animation, everyone is like, Kevin Conroy is the only person that can voice Batman. And like, sure, I get it. He is the best voice of Batman ever. But whoever decided that Peter Weller should voice Dark Knight Returns Batman is a genius. It's brilliant.
It's definitely an outside the box pick, but like when you hear it and like when you think about it, it kind of makes sense. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think we have two of the best voice acting performances in any DC animated film in this. So you got Peter Weller as Batman, then you got Michael Emerson as the Joker, it's one of my favorite iterations of the Joker ever. It's just, I can't find the words. It's just so good.
Yeah, it's chilling because it's like where Mark Hamill's like voice performance is so distinct and iconic, and it's like sinister, but it's like there's like an edge of just like comedy to it. Like it's like a more traditional Joker voice. Michael Emerson's is just like.
There are a lot of times where, because obviously a lot of the dialogue in The Dark Knight Returns with Joker and Batman is very affectionate. Miller in the comic book and in the movie as well, they really focus on this idea of the Joker being in love with Batman. That's a big part of the Joker's character in Returns. But the way that Emerson delivers a lot of these, like on the page, really affectionate lines of dialogue, he does it in a way that to me, it's he channels like Hannibal Lecter in a lot of ways in this film.
Yes, that's I 100% get that. Yeah,
and it's such a cool way of doing the Joker that's so unique to this movie.
I want people to get me.
All right then.
That's why I'm gonna kill everyone in this room.
And it's one of the best iterations of the characters you'll see. It's such an incredible achievement that, they made The Dark Knight Returns and made it in a way that, as far as the high standards of adapting a comic book go, you don't get much higher than The Dark Knight Returns. It's so many people's favorite comic ever. And so when they announced they were turning it into a movie, a lot of people were quite apprehensive, even though at the time DC had a great track record, because, you could make it good, but it wouldn't be as good as the comic. But in the end, when you watch the 2-part film, it understands what makes the graphic novel so great, and it's such a love letter to that source material, while also being a great, enjoyable movie in its own right. It's so well animated. Everyone in it is brilliant, and it's such a unique and kind of timeless story that, especially like comparing it to Red Son, which is very much in the same boat as being like this isolated Elseworld story that people love, that has such a distinct premise and style to it. The Dark Knight Returns is like the blueprint for how you make films like Red Son. While I like Red Son, I think it's really good. Like, if you've watched this and you've seen Red Son and you haven't seen Dark Knight Returns, watch it. It's one of the best superhero animated films ever. It might be the best, honestly. It's brilliant. It's definitely up there. It's probably, for me, it's probably either that, the one I'm going to mention, or Into the Spider-Verse.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, and the thing is like what those two films have, or what those two films don't have going for it, is that they weren't released theatrically, which Spider-Verse gets the unfair advantage of doing that, and it's also Spider-Verse is an original story. But I would have to agree with you. I would throw one more in there, and I don't think this one's on your list, so I'll just briefly bring it up. But Under the Red Hood, I actually love Under the Red Hood.
Yeah, it's funny because obviously that is based on the Under the Hood comic, which is the return of Jason Todd. The graphic novel in itself, I'm not a huge fan of. The comic book adaptation that it's based on, I'm not a particularly big fan of, but the animated movie that they do is so good.
Yeah, I agree.
That has, is it John DiMaggio that voices the Joker in that?
Yep.
Again, like,
another great vocal performance.
But again, it's so different from Michael Emerson, and it's so different from Mark Hamill. But in that particular story, John DiMaggio is perfect. But no, that's not on my list, but it happily could be, and it's one that definitely is worth recommending.
Moving on to the next one, you mentioned Elseworld dystopian, just kind of like weird, wacky interpretations of these characters. Your final one, I think definitely checks that box, and for me personally is my favorite DC animated film. So
now I should probably throw this with a disclaimer, because I feel like everyone is now expecting me to talk about Batman Mask of the Phantasm.
Right.
Which I'm sorry. I love Batman Mask of the Phantasm.
That's
Mask
great,
of the Phantasm is great. It's one of the best Batman movies. But it just missed out on my list, and I'm so sorry. But it is a Batman movie, and it's a Batman movie that is near and dear to my heart. It's one of the things that made me love Batman and made me love DC Comics in general when I was traumatized by it as a young child. It is the 2000 animated spin-off to the television show Batman Beyond, Return of the Joker. Return of the Joker is brilliant. Unlike the other two, and unlike Red Son, it is not based on anything, though it is quite similar thematically to a very famous DC storyline. So just to overview the basic premise, it is kind of set after the conclusion of the Batman Beyond show, although it's not particularly clear. Terry McGinnis is Batman in Neo Gotham. It's set like 50 years in the future. It's basically Batman in the Blade Runner universe, is a fair way of putting it. It's like Blade Runner, Akira, that kind of scenario. Terry McGinnis is a very Peter Parker, Dick Grayson-esque character. He takes up the mantle, and Bruce Wayne essentially becomes like the Alfred, like the guy in the chair. It's great. The show is awesome.
It's my just throwing that out there, but it's my favorite interpretation of Batman. Just period.
Wow.
I fucking love Batman
brilliant.
Beyond.
I'm
Yeah.
a huge fan of Batman Beyond. Anyway, so around the time that the show wrapped, they started working on a movie version, and Return of the Joker is just so good. It's both a send off to Batman Beyond and also like an epilogue to Batman the Animated Series, which had finished a few years earlier, which obviously it then ran on into the Justice League shows, but the show itself never had a huge send off. So what a lot of Return of the Joker is it's flashbacks to kind of between the end of Batman the Animated Series and Return of the Joker. Terry McGinnis is Batman, then suddenly the Joker shows back up, and he looks he's not aged a day from the last time you saw him in Batman the Animated Series.
Hello, Gotham. Joker's back in town.
Terry is not equipped to deal with Joker, and essentially Bruce freaks the fuck out. He's like, this can't be the real Joker. And then you find out why that can't be, and Bruce tells you it can't be the Joker because I watched the Joker die. And so like the middle portion of the film then becomes like a flashback to after the Batman the Animated Series, and you see the final ever Batman Joker story as, you know, Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill as you know them. And basically what happens is the Joker and Harley Quinn abduct Tim Drake, who's Robin, and essentially torture and torment him and break him to the point where
it's pretty brutal.
It's dark.
Yeah,
like,
it's
I
a
remember
dark
watching it as
movie.
a young child, and it freaked me out.
Yeah.
Basically, like, I think they say he's gone for like a month, and the Joker and Harley are like torturing him, and like they like dye and bleach his skin and everything. So the point where when Bruce tracks him down and finds him, he's been turned into a mini Joker, and it's so chilling. It's similar to All-Star in a way, where it's like, this is the kind of story that can only be told at the end of this character's cycle. You can't tell another story in the Batman animated universe world after this with the Joker, because this is, you know, as far as the things that Mark Hamill's Joker did in those shows and in all of the other movies, nothing he's ever done has affected Batman in what he did to Tim. In a lot of ways, it's very similar to the Death in the Family comic, which is where the Joker kills Jason Todd. Jason's not a part of the DC animated universe, especially, at least not the one with like Batman the Animated Series and stuff, for obvious reasons. After Dick Grayson, they introduced Tim Drake, and they kind of just skipped over that. So in a lot of ways, this is the kind of homage to that. Death in the Family is widely seen as like the Joker's like darkest moment, where he beats a young child to death with the crowbar and then blows up. And then they do this in this movie, which is in some ways not as bad, but in other ways it's worse because it's so methodical and twisted. You know, beating someone up with a crowbar and then blowing them up it's quick, you know. Whereas kidnapping a 13-year-old child and over a month, you know, physically and mentally torturing him to the point where he breaks is another level. So basically, Batman fights the Joker. Tim is, you know, horribly tormented by what's happened to him, and essentially the Joker stabs Bruce in the leg and basically tells Tim, who's now, I think he's calling him like Joker Jr., basically throws him a gun and tells him to shoot Bruce. And basically Tim has a breakdown, shoots Joker and kills him instead. And then that's like the final Kevin Conroy, Mark Hamill, Batman Joker story in this universe that had been going around for like a decade at that point. And then the film flashes back and goes back to being a Batman Beyond movie. It's revealed that Tim, who's now like in his 40s, he is actually the Joker. And then he fights Terry, and it's really good.
Yeah, it's awesome. There are just so many. There's so many great lines of dialogue in that. There's so many great moments.
I'm going to say it now. I'm just going to get it out there because I wholeheartedly believe it.
Yeah.
If you're a fan of Mark Hamill's Joker, you need to watch this movie because it's his best performance as the Joker.
I was just about to say that. Yeah, I 100% agree.
He's always great. Like Mark Hamill, and he's in anything, it's never bad. Let's just be real. Even when he stood on a cliff in The Force Awakens, he was one of the best parts of that movie.
Yeah.
It's like
even when he was poorly CGI'd in The Rise of Skywalker, he was still the best part of that movie.
Yeah, I mean, the bar's not exactly high.
Yeah, that's true.
But like, if you're a fan of his Joker, whether it's from the Arkham games or the Batman cartoons or just anything, or if you're just a fan of Mark Hamill, or if you're just a fan of the Joker, watch this movie because it's one of the best Joker stories ever. When we were talking about comparing him to Michael Emerson, like Hamill's Joker he's scary and he's twisted and maniacal, but there's also something comedic about him. He's kind of endearing in a weird way. Whereas in this, that's gone. Like, he is at his darkest and most sinister. And it's the fact that Hamill can do both and nail it both so well is just, it shows how great he is. Kevin Conroy as well, who has to voice essentially two different Bruce Waynes in this movie. You know, he nails it as the old 80-year-old wise and jaded Bruce, and then also jumping back and showing Bruce in his prime, but also incredibly, like, this is probably Bruce's lowest moment. This is what happens to Tim is essentially what sets in motion what happens to him to the point where he meets Terry and Batman Beyond happens. He goes down a really dark path.
Yeah, I mean, like the first episode, not to get too much on a tangent here, but the first episode of Batman Beyond, we literally see Bruce pick up a gun and like almost shoot a criminal, and that's when he's like, I gotta hang up the mantle.
Stop being Batman. And by that point, like, he's isolated himself from everyone. He basically becomes a hermit and leaves himself to essentially leave himself to die. And it's only that, you know, Terry comes into his life that gives Bruce that kind of reason to keep going. But you can plot a course of Bruce's life in these DC things, and it's what happens in the flashback scenes of this movie with Terry and with Tim and with the Joker that sets him down the path of where you meet him in Batman Beyond, where he's pulling guns out on criminals and he's lost himself. Obviously, like the flashbacks in the film, you see the Joker die, but the Joker, what he does, like, his legacy in a way lives on within Bruce for the next like 40 years. And, you know, not to make too many bad puns, but you very rarely see a story where the Joker wins. But in regards to what happens to Bruce and what happens to Batman over the course of after the flashback scene in that movie, the Joker dies, but he really gets the last laugh over Batman. And
absolutely. Yeah. No, well, and in a way, this was sort of the precursor for, the Arkham City, Arkham Knight thing, where the Joker dies,
definitely.
but he's still getting the last laugh, and he's still in Bruce's head in the game.
That's a good comparison. But I was kind of hesitant to mention alongside the other two because, like Red Son, All-Star and Dark Knight Returns are very closely based on comics, whereas Return of the Joker it's an original concept written by the creators of Batman Beyond and Batman the Animated Series. It's put together by the likes of Paul Dini, Bruce Timm, Ray McDuffie, all of the genius people that made those shows and made Mask of the Phantasm and the other movies. So, like I said, while it's not based on any comic specifically, it pays a lot of homage to things like A Death in the Family. There are a few Dark Knight Returns kind of things in there. And then also, you know, if you like neo-dystopian kind of like things like Blade Runner, if you like Akira, you'll probably like Batman Beyond.
Oh, yeah. I mean, straight up, all that cyberpunk, like...
Oh, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, like just Batman Beyond is a perfect show. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the selling point alone. But yeah, Return of the Joker is something that I will recommend people to watch until the day I die, because especially when it comes to those DC animated movies, like the ones that are part of that Batman the Animated Series universe, kind of doesn't get talked about enough because people love Phantasm so much, which is fair. Like, it's great. People don't really talk about Return of the Joker as much. And for me, it's one of the best Batman Joker stories I've ever seen or read.
Yeah.
That's why it's on my list.
That's why it's not deservedly so. I think the reason is, just to kind of put a cap on it, but I think the reason is because, Phantasm was theatrically released.
Yeah.
People loved BTAS so much, and while people love Batman Beyond, it never has really gotten the credit that BTAS has.
With the nature of it being a spin-off, the people that watched it love it to this day.
Yeah,
it's not. It's not in the same like mainstream pop culture as Batman the Animated Series is, or Phantasm, which is fair. But still, no, it's great.
For sure.
Go watch it, or I'm gonna call the police.
Well, if you want to hear Owen talk more about Return of the Joker, I figure this is a good time to plug your video that you actually just did on it. So go ahead on over to his channel, because he did a really deep dive into it, and it's an excellent video, especially if you love the Batman animated series stuff, Batman Beyond and Return of the Joker. Those are the essential movies to watch, the essential DC animated movies to watch after you've seen Superman Red Son, or maybe watch those before seeing Red Son, so you can kind of get a feel for what to expect with that film. We have All-Star Superman, The Dark Knight Returns, parts 1 and 2, which is funny because that's like honestly the length, if not longer, of like a theatrical film when you combine both parts. It's ridiculous. And then Batman Beyond, The Return of the Joker. 3 excellent picks there. So Owen, thank you so much for coming on and talking about DC animated movies. Where can everyone find you?
Well, first off, it's my pleasure. It's great to be back on FilmSpeak. I've missed it, and I've missed chatting with you. It's always a great time.
It's been a while.
But yeah, if you like hearing what I have to say, want some more of me, you can head on over to Owen Likes Comics, where I rant and rave and make analysis and discourse about comic books, films, and everything else. I'm actually, like I said, I released a video recently on Return of the Joker that I'm insanely proud of. And if you like listening to me ramble about it here, if you want another 15 minutes of that, you might enjoy that video.
Yeah, there you go.
You know, if you like All-Star Superman, I'm actually writing a video about All-Star Superman as we speak, so maybe hang around, wait for that to come out. But yeah, thanks for having me on, Griffin. I really appreciate it, and I hope everyone watching has enjoyed this.
And there you have it, guys. Those are our essential DC animated films. If you haven't done so already, be sure to let us know what your picks are down in the comments section below. And while you're down there, be sure to like this video, share with your friends, and subscribe to the FilmSpeak channel for more episodes of Film Essentials, some movie reviews, our Westworld podcast, and a whole lot of movie-ness going on around here. Film is our second language, and we're going to continue to talk about it through quarantine and beyond. Definitely be sure to go check out Owen's channel. Like I said, the guy is incredible. He really knows his stuff when it comes to comics, comic book adaptations, and so forth. And if you've enjoyed this video, you're going to love the content he's got over on his channel. But lastly, guys, be sure to like FilmSpeak on Facebook, follow us on Twitter simply by searching FilmSpeak. And if you like me specifically and you like what I have to say, you can give me a follow on Twitter at Griff Schiller. All right, that's going to do it for this installment of Film Essentials, and I'll catch you next time. Take care.